Okay,
Then,
Honorable Professor.
then,
Since we are
then,
chatting, Professor,
yeah, sorry.
Honorable, yes, my doctor. Since
Sorry.
we are
Yeah,
chatting,
yeah, yeah.
we don't need to be lectured and with all
Ah,
the ascension and the hypothesis that you have accumulated in your life. But now we need to question the ideology of the fact that um, identity crisis. When we have to talk about
mm,
mathematics, in these cases, we're using European like Greek, the Pythagoras, the Platos, and all the Solon, that
mm,
the Caesarea that were quoted. But now, what I want us to look into, Honorable Mkhulwam Ohloniphekile, the idea that literature stems from out of human thinking and consciousness without moral guidance of their religion in cases of Islamic literature. In its history, when Huren built what we call at Hakim, the University of Arabia of the first caliphate, that proclaimed to what you have said, civilize Europe. And now, getting into that, that space was not administrated by African ideology. It never carried. Yes, there were Africans who were influenced via the Abbasid, even the Hurrain, during the times of Umayyad invasion of Aleppo until they reached to Africa. We can take it back because Hurrain get to build the university in the 8th century AD. And but now their conquest of Africa happened before that. And they've succeeded to be in Carthage through the Persians who have already made those conquests from long time. And even the Romans who have already entered into the African land. So there is already amalgamation of cultural behavior, social thinking, and perspective of people. It is not one-sided. So that is why when me now, my question comes from this that how can we be blind into the idea that Islam, yes, it was influenced by Africa, but Africans were subjugated and they were used as slaves or monitors or prefect. It's the same way as Europeans will use prefects in Africa who will protect the interest or what they know protectorate kings and monarchies. And this was done by the Islam. And the Islam has done it with the Kaitam, with we can go to all the northern kingdoms that have shared, even Kuluchek Adyab does identify them in some of his books, where some of these kingdoms have interacted with the Islam. So this goes to the part of black people. The idea of that black people influence everything, everything is ours. It is fallacy in cases like that. It is degrading to the declinement of black people not attending these all scholars and the people who protest against that. Example, in the times where you talk about the Roman, within the Roman, the Eastern Roman and the Western Roman, the Western Romans had a disagreement amongst the Eastern Roman, and the Eastern Roman had a different functional system. Their system was adapting to Roman ideas, as same way as the Greek, the way they conquered. It was not like the way we perceive it now, where we say, oh, Rome will be just independent and behave their Roman ways, and then we have our own unique ways. It was never like that. They have policies, maxims that condition you to be devoted to the Roman Empire or the eagle of the Rome. So somewhere, somehow, we need to speak history the way it is, as far as even the Romans will articulate it. Because even in their mathematics, the Colossus, because I heard you talking about not having the maths. So I'm thinking about the Colossus that had a diverse maths within in a manner that it featured aquarian species in the Colossus. They featured even zoological animals from mountains, the wilderness, in their own colossus. And they have a formational calculation of how the arena was shaped. And the number system base related with the worship system of Pluto, I mean to say Jupiter, Satan, and all these ideology until to the Romases and Romas, the founders of Rome, who were fed by the Lapacreos called the wolf, or the wolf that fed the Roman founders. So these people have already created a mathematical system, but their mathematical system was conditioned into violence, as same as the Greeks, since the Roman literature, philosophy, and knowledge system, it is inherited from the Greeks. The Greeks themselves, they created the same system via the Draconian times. The only people who came were the people who disagree with the Draconian, meaning the invading, the violent nature that they carry as an ultimatum, supreme authority, and knowledge system. That is why now the mathematics of Greeks, quantum physics. I had a beautiful lecture on quantum physics by Nana now. I was listening to everything. But now the main problem, they won't relate these ideas. Exactly when you speak, Honorable Christian Mkulu, when you speak about the materialistic world, it doesn't suit the African perspective, meaning it doesn't give the layer of the perspective that Africans will perceive material in, but it will give the academical views, meaning it will be biased, exactly the way they were biased when they invaded us, when they colonized us. Or I mean to say, when the colonization program happened after 1884. This program happened into subjugating Africa in not understanding their culture, nor seeing industrial life or mathematics in their culture, but to introduce Christianity. And Christianity can never be the only criminal in this case. Judaism, it's a criminal who benefited in slavery, who still benefit even today in exploiting Africans, and who still benefit in subjugating African in falsity of history that we came from Abraham. Islam, yes, we all know about Islam's dirty work. As far as we know about Christianity's dirty work. But exonerating Judaism and comparing it as something that was stolen from Africa, it is highest fallacy. That is where we create false history. Because now the idea of the great Ngazulu and Tawu in a manner that you said the Abraham can be a Zulu. That is highly decorative and degrading to the history that is billion years old that the Zulus will narrate orally and in storytelling as I'm one of the story keeper and it is passed through to me. So how do you calculate all those phases that you have told us about? Because they appear for me degrading to this billion-year-old culture that I carry a knowledge system and mathematics, and that has been that we have kept, and there's people who are living this, and uh, and some people say, "Oh, must we separate culture from spirituality?" But our culture has been database because a culture is something that constructs a society and in its way of life of spirituality and material and soul-wise and ethic. As far as majority has spoke about ethic, Ubuntu, someone had to present Ubuntu here. But this kind of aspect of constructing a state and community and society that start within the family structure. So as we carry the oldest database of such structures, they are even mathematically. I had one of the healers from South Africa talking the same narrative we have here in South Africa that we have already introduced. That is the same narrative we introduced. I introduced this I think 20 years back during the times of Mkulu Baba Credo. The systematic calculation of our DNA, the database of ancestry, the number system that we carry from 1 to 2 to 4 to 8 to 16 to 32 to 64, to a continuality of pattern of number systems that can relate to some of the languages and the items that we carry via ritualistic wise, and that can relate to systematic communication and the way we perceive spirits, the way we perceive soul, the way we perceive mind in our community, without going into details of such mathematical formula and its system. And just to sum it up, there was a time we had, I think it was 16 years back in Wits University with some other student in Cape Town University. I'm not a student, by the way, I'm an initiate. Uh, with these students, we had a typical laboratory experiment where we can access lightning, meaning the electrical current of a lightning, and see its compounds and its qualities. Um, with that being done, the people who rebel against such a project, because we were doing it during the times of transformation. They had a program called Transforming of Ideologies and Scholarly System and Economy and Mathematics here in South Africa. That is based on awakening pre the 2020 awakening upheaval hysteria. But now, within that space, we were creating that the Pan-Africanist holders and the African unity holders, meaning ideologists and intellectuals, they're the ones who saw such a project. And we have already showed them an example. Remember that. It's not like we're talking. It was an example, but they saw a project as harmful, dangerous, foreign. It must be guided by either Islam, Judaism, or God. If it doesn't have God there, then this project won't work. And I've already introduced new ways that lightning it was used traditionally to enhance lifestyle of people, health-wise, and even in the healing system, even in communication aspect of advancing technology, as far as you see electricity has advanced your technology now. But we were introducing these things. So I see it degrading for me now in this case where I've passed a decade, where I'll be reminded of the trauma of Judaism, of Islam, and their literature, that it is African awakening. African awakening has archaeology, as Honorable Bernard has said, that there's archaeological evidence, whereas Judaism doesn't have any archaeological evidence at all. Yet in their history, in the Hashim hymn, when we read their history, they we can trace them to their ancestors, the shepherdic ancestors. There's accuracy into that, and they don't relate to black people. But I would like to close it there. Yet I will say the Caucasians don't relate with the Afrikaners in Latin talks. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, Modimo and Dava, you've said a lot. It would be nice, I think, if you, um, as if you don't mind me saying so, put in writing your points of disagreement, because I think it will help in this discussion, to have the pushbacks in writing, and then the responses also 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 in writing. Um, the 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 idea that um, I am not aware that we, or I have not said, I'm not aware anybody has said that 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 Judaism is, or the way that it is today, is African. I am not aware of that. What the argument that has actually been made is that the notion of Jews, or if you like, the original Jews, not the Ashkenazi Jews, but the original Jews and the Hebrew language itself, that it has roots in Africa. And that if you look at Ethiopia, for instance, you will find forms of a Christian worship that are similar to Islam, where they bow down to the ground and rise up, etc., etc. So the idea, as I understand it, is that Islam and Christianity and Judaism, if you like, historically have their roots on the African continent. But I am not aware that anybody has argued that the Ashkenazi Jews today who are committing genocide, etc., and their forebears, that somehow that is us. I also hear you when you say that you find it offensive to say that Abraham could be a Zulu man. Now, that is not a historical assertion. It's not a historical statement. I'm not saying that it's been historically proven that Abraham was Zulu. I'm not saying that. It's just a way of talking to say that for all we know, the way in which Abraham has been presented to us may not be the truth. That's the point I'm making. And so if in presenting it like that, someone finds it offensive, that's okay. Then it can be said in a different way. But I think the fundamental point being made is that Abraham is presented as a non-African, you see, and perhaps historically he is not. Now, in terms of the Romans, yes, the Romans had their mathematics, as did the Mozambicans, as did the Evers, as did everybody else. But I think what we are saying is that if you look at the contribution to abstract theory, what today is symbolic mathematics, the Romans contributed nothing to that. There is no evidence that they contributed anything to abstract theory. That is the point we are making. Then in terms of, are we saying that everything that other cultures have developed when they left the continent, can they be described as African? I agree with you that the Persians are not black today, but we also hear that when you go back into history, the first Persians were black. When you go back into history, the first Chinese were black. When you go back into history, the first, even here in the UK, the first English people were black. That when our forefathers left the continent, they were black. So I am not saying that I am an expert on this. I'm just saying that is the argument that is made. But that is not to say that, therefore, any philosophical, ideological, scientific, policy developments that have happened since are down to us Africans today. That is not my understanding of what the argument is. The argument is historical, not contemporary. And today, physics is physics. There is no African physics, Persian physics, European physics, and USA physics. Physics
Uh,
is what it is. But
Pardon me, my honorable say.
but
I would like
but
to say
mm,
there's an African physics and
mm,
then there's European physics. Theory
yes,
wouldn't give us a more of a
I
space to
I was coming to
explain
that.
such
Yeah,
such
yeah,
phenomena
yeah, it's
and
fine. So,
assertions.
but what we can say is that the cultural response to the universe will be different. Therefore, in that sense, you can find, like you're saying, a physics that is a way in which we Africans see the world, and so on and so forth. So, and the axiological priorities of different groups differ. So, um, for example, I may not use physics to design an atomic bomb, but somebody would. So, so in the same way as we can say physics is what it is. Yes, there are differences in the way in which different groups do it. Yes. So yeah. So I hope I have addressed uh, some of the points you've made. Yeah. Thank you very much. Like you said, it is a conversation.
Thank you, Professor. It's a conversation. Don't worry,
Yes.
Professor. You've already addressed some of the conversation, the points I've made.
Mm,
Example, going back to the idea of Abraham.
mm,
Abraham practiced one of the cultures that it will be forbidden within the Zulu community. Now, when we're talking about ethics, conduct, and perspective, and how people perceive life, Abraham will practice what they call mishkav bene, or in simple, the benamoyet or benamoyot. In simple, that will be called bestiality or bestiality, laying with animals. That is why in the Bible or in Deuteronomy, there's condition into doing that because Moses has found a new culture. According to the narrative of um, Abrahamic children's story, he has found a new culture and a new way of administrating systems. And these new ways are one of the morals and ethical conduct, where
mm,
bestiality becomes forbidden because Moses got some of the rules and regulations on approaching the Ark of the Covenant from a Macedonian priest. I forgot his name. He's a father to Zipporah, wife of
mm,
Moses.
mm,
And Macedonian is not far and Mediterranean. I mean to say, according to the biblical reference, he's he's not far from Egypt, Ethiopia, when it's explained in biblical theology. So, which means this person can have some relation into conduct of Abantu or the Guam or the Kwa, whatever the name, the native of the land will be identified. So Moses, I'm just making the biblical story becoming maybe a real world. So if Abraham will be the ancestor of the Zulus forbid bestiality. Hey, they don't, these are these are something that is highly taboo in their community. And if we can compare a Judaic culture, it doesn't matter if it's a Ashkenaz, because we know the world was black in the old time. And then we need to be honest about what we have experienced. Judaism was not introduced by Africans in Africa, the indigenous Africans. It is something that is introduced by foreigners outside. Ashkenaz are rightful owners of it. So when we going to say bestiality has been in Africa, because there's some other traditions that were forbidden in Deuteronomy and in the Bible itself that were part of the people who were with Moses. or the community that was with Moses. It's not something they inherit from somewhere. It's not like, oh, we inherit this behavior from Egyptians, no, from the Babylonians. It's their behavior. It's their community act where there's a tendency of having different gods, and then they had to be directed to their own God. So I'm making an example with bestiality, that if we have to make mannerism and behavior and say, oh, why the black people now don't carry these mannerism, they don't have these behaviors, and we forbid that. Like, it is seen as taboo, and we can go even to the food consumption, because majority of the time we only look at things based in the basis of academical narrative, and academical narrative seems to perceive archaeology and ethnology and all these studies as different studies, and they can push their own propagandas and agendas within the studies, as the way you coach the map. Christopher, a Portuguese cartographer who wrote that West Africa has Judea. He was not even identifying the whole entire other tribes, but he was identifying similarity of the word that he had within those spaces that may sound like the word Judah. These are studies that did happen because he was one of the people who lived in the 17th century. These are studies were done even by Angelus, Panzerius, in Zimbabwe, in Mozambique, where they compare, even in Zambia, he said, with the Zambian monarchies, where these missionaries, these are 14th century now, they compare some words, because there's a need for a lost place of God. These are people who are conditioned to view Africa as some sort of a Eden. We can get this same narrative within the Arab Caliphate movement, hence why they come and invade Africa. The idea of Al-Abulan, or the old Sanskrit word that has already moved or dominated the Arabian community when they have their what we call renaissance into Islam Caliphate establishment. They have a word of al-Qabulat, the need of going to see the Garden of Eden, no, to explore the Garden of Eden, because everybody perceive Africa as a Garden of Eden. That can be even justified. It's not religiously, but it can be justified that Arabians depended on Africa, the Romans depended on Africa, the Persians depended on Africa, the Greeks depended on Africa, not only on educational basis, but on the basis of food security, on the basis of state administration. That is why their legends had to come, like the Greek legends, who came and land in Africa. It was on those bases that the whole entire surface of other primate places who can create their own civilization depends on Africa, and not only on educational basis only, but even food. Hence why they had to defend those interests. They had to go and fight for those interests. And we can get them with their conquest. It doesn't mean Africa was a Garden of Eden, but this is the perspective and the fantasy, the imagination of these people, that with their civilization, on how they perceive. We can get it on paralysis. We can get it on their writers, how they perceive Africa. Hence why they say, oh, Ethiopia, the lands of the sun-best Ben faces. Hence why they talk about Olympias. That is where Africa was identified with Middle East, where it is seen as the whole entire place as the land of Olympia. Before you reach Olympia, you need to go and rise the high mountain and pass the seas. But there's stories about that. These are stories that try to explain that the African knowledge system, it is centered in its own knowledge, and its behavior can never be compared with some people who had savageous tendencies, who had brutal laws. And as you have explained about fusion, that can be an outburst, and the nuclear fusion that has been created, because people are only looking at it like that. Now we are talking about morality aspect of things, that we can have a nuclear. That is why in their science fiction, when they try to tell you what they've lost, they tell you that the Wakanda, because I'm going to drop it here, say, the Wakanda has a uranium that it can create destructive force and recreative force. But that is not how it is in Africa. We have already have some other advanced system. That is why when we were colonized, we were not colonized with a weaponry system. We were colonized with the deceptional system. And that deceptional system still works today. That is why to drop it is that is why everybody will believe BBC rather than what is happening internally in South Africa by South Africans. They'll rather believe what BBC says, and everybody's conditioned to push the propaganda. It's the same deception that was used to colonize us. Thank you.
Sorry, so brother, I missed some of what you said. I had to use the bathroom. Sorry. So I missed some of the things you said. But I wanted to talk about cultural differences, because there is something, an idea in consciousness about the humanist tradition of Africa, which is that underlying all African culture, or the culture of Black people, if you like, is some humanism. The idea that we are human beings first of all, and that therefore human relations, etc., etc. So then that becomes a basis for ethical decisions, etc., etc., etc. But having said that, I think that if I was talking to a Luo person and I said some things, the Luo will find it just as offensive as I would as an Ewe. You see, because as an Ewe, we circumcise. Men are circumcised. There are African cultures where men are not circumcised. And for us, it is offensive to even suggest that my son should not be circumcised because I live in England or America or whatever. That somehow it is okay because the child's mother happens to be non-Ewe, for instance, and they see it as violence, and therefore I should not do it. You see, so for me as an Ewe, that is very offensive, because we circumcise our sons. You see, but then in another African culture, like the Luo cultures, I understand, the Luos do not circumcise. So then you see, for them, it's just as offensive to suggest that. You see, so in the sense in which certain things are offensive to a Zulu, you see, you find that when you come to West Africa, certain things are also offensive. But underneath all those cultural differences, I think you are aware of the history of King Darius the Persian, called the Greeks and the Indians, and asked the Indians, what can we do so that you can stop burning your dead? And asked the Greeks, what shall we do? What will make you change your mind in burying your dead, in the ground? And both of them replied, there's nothing you can do that will make us change our mind. So I'm suggesting that within African culture, we have that as well. There are certain traditional differences. But the point is that beyond those traditional differences, there is a fundamental humanity that we all share in. It's a shared fundamental human identity. And the idea is that it is it is that shared human identity that should be the basis for building a new Africa, and not the cultural differences, which means that this group will never allow their, for example, a son in their royal house to marry from that family, etc., etc. Of course, this is complicated by religion, whether the person is a Muslim, a Christian, a traditional African. So you have several competing identities. In fact, not just competing at specific layers, but even layers of competition, with a whole history. So the idea is that there is this intangible phenomenon. I'm linking it with ACIPS now. That there is an intangible phenomenon in Africa that is to do with our shared humanity. Despite the diversity in language, traditional practices, norms, etc., that there is this shared intangible phenomenon called a shared identity, and that somehow, if we can tap into that, then it won't matter whether I am an Ewe, you are a Zulu, I am a Christian, you are a Muslim, I am a traditional African, you are a Buddhist, etc. Or I don't believe in any God at all, for instance. It doesn't matter what somebody's religious position is. It doesn't really matter. And then again, someone like Sister Sanyawo, like Sanyawo was saying, but does it really matter? Is religion, and why is religion an issue if we have spirituality? Why should we even just not set aside religion and just focus on spirituality? Well, then one can argue that, well, that is a decision that every African must make, whether to let go of religious heritage and just focus on spirituality or not. I'll pause there. I think Sister Anyawu has her hand up. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I was glad you came back to that because I really was wondering. I hadn't really thought about it until I heard you all this morning. Uh, it, there's so much to it, and even, of course, with Abraham, a lot of the violence happening around the world is there are people who, based on their religion, believe that they are God's chosen people. I grew up in one denomination, then another, but I was told in each one, if you don't do what we say, and all of them were black, the well, then you're going to hell because you're not the chosen people. So that seems, from my observation, it seems to be built into just about like it's part. I think you said that earlier. It's part of the extraction or colonization. Things have to fall in place, and it seems that what God you serve seems to play a big part in the ability of the colonizer to uh, to get the extractions they want. Once people believe something, from a God standpoint, God can punish you, God can reward you in this life, the next life. I mean, there's so much control that goes in without naming any of them. Now, in the Old Testament, and I'm not a scholar, but I do know a lot of questions have come up in terms of how it was put together. So it's not even just a conversation about Abraham and who he was, because according to that story, he didn't have, or whatever. But at some point, God promised him something. Then he had a baby by somebody out of one of his slaves or something, and then that baby had a promise, and then all the people have a promise, and he had the people who don't have promises. So all these scholars like yourselves who search those things out, and then they were they barbaric. They got into something happened, and they started eating their children in the Old Testament. They were told to go in and kill every man, woman, child, every animal. If you leave anything living, then God is going to punish you. So even questions are coming up with the Old Testament as to whether or not there was one God or many gods, because they were serving different ones, and based on who they gave the offering to, And then the one God said, stop killing your children and sending them through the fire, but then they continue to do that. So there's so much in there that's off. So I just wonder, and certainly colonization that I'm just looking at, I don't see the unity we're talking about even within Christianity. The unity we're talking about is not totally even possible in one of the traditions because of the differences in that. So I have another question though that I wanted to bring up that has not come up, and I don't know if it again, for me to be up from 1 in the morning to 9 as it is now, I don't know that I can do that this next morning. But will someone talk about, in the midst of all of this that we're talking about, what do you all see as scholars? Where do women fit in there? Because there are some who believe that the even beyond racism system, that even prior to that, there was patriarchy, there was talked to some men from Somali who was from Somalian, and they asked me to talk to some of the women once about, and it's not no longer called female circumcision, but they believed they had come to believe that it came in with Islam, the treatment and subjugation of. I'm sure it didn't necessarily start, but apparently the brutality of it and the worst of it came in with Islam. So there's so many pieces to this. What is your thought in terms of where do we go spiritually, taking these, the man was created first and women is subject to man, all that again, all of that subjugation of one person over another is in some kind of religion. So what are your thoughts about that? Where do women fit in the ideal system?
So as far as I understand it, you can't talk about okay. So as far as I understand, even that question itself is problematic, um, because humanity is to be human. We can go into arguments about who is human, whether the humans are those who were created by the previous beings from Nibiru, etc., etc. But if you look at us right now, and the question is, where does woman fit into it? And the answer is that even that question itself is problematic because the notion that a woman is there and a man is there, and here I am referring to the tradition that I belong to. I can argue philosophically. Maybe I should. So philosophically, the origin of humanity is matter. So although we have spiritual dimensions of matter, by which I mean things we cannot see, touch, things that we cannot see but feel, like the air, etc., etc., etc. The foundation of man is a material being, and in that sense, all of us come from the same matter, by which we mean we are all carbon, if you like. Yeah, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. In fact, all of us are water, if you like. A large part of us is water, etc., etc. Therefore, in that sense, fundamentally, philosophically, there's no difference between the man and the woman. Where there are differences are the materialist differences. So, for example, the woman can give birth. I am a man, therefore I can't, etc., etc. But these materialist functions are not what defines the woman as a being. You see, what the woman is as a being is over and above whatever functions nature has endowed her with, or nature has endowed the man with, and therefore, if we are to look for differences in the roles of women in society, It cannot be in nature itself, because it's not nature that is telling us how we must organize ourselves. It is cultural history, cultural norms, our physical environment, the practices that emerge from it, etc., etc., etc. And therefore, the role of a woman is that she is the mother of all creation. It's because of her that we all are. We all came from her, male or female. That doesn't matter. We all came from the womb of the woman. And so the domination of women, therefore, in certain cultures, as I said, has no basis in matter itself. It has its basis in what you might call, or you might say, it's a constructivist. It's a constructive. It's been constructed. It's a social construction. And if you look at some parts of African history, for instance, and if even today, the Akans that Brother Bernard belongs to, they are matrilineal. They are matrilineal. So you even inherit via the mother's bloodline. You can only be a chief if you come down the mother's bloodline. You can't be a chief from the father's bloodline. Whatever you are and will be is from the mother's bloodline, you see. And the monarch can be a woman. So in the Akan, if you look at Akan history, in the past, a woman sat as a monarch for the very reason that she is a mother of the nation. And it is her sons that are the chiefs or the kings or whatever. You see, then you come to other cultures, in the same Ghana, if you like, and then they are patrilineal. You see, so my group, for instance, we are patrilineal, but we're not patrilineal in the sense that the woman must be dominated. So that is from the philosophical position that we all belong to the same matter. Therefore, nature does not say that woman must be dominated. There's no way in nature does it say that. It's just men and women who have just evolved their own cultural response to nature and have come up with that. And so if you have a culture, a religious culture that is dominating women, then I think we ought to look at that culture and where it got that, because it must have come from its historical evolution. It cannot be that God, if you take God as the creator of the universe, or if you say that the laws of nature are the laws of God, or that the universe is the word of God in that higher sense, if you say that, then Allah could not have said that women should be dominated. It is male culture, if you like. It's a cultural response to a specific historical condition that has persisted. And then finally, I'm trying to remember this scholar. He wrote. He's a Senegalese scholar. He wrote The African Origin of Civilization, True or False. I can't remember his name. So he has written a whole book on this. He's researched this and written that the African, historically has been a matrilineal culture. There are historical records of Islamites being upset with traditional Africans because they did not dominate their women. So in our culture, a woman can have male friends, yeah? And her male friends can visit her. Even though she's my wife, her male friends can visit her. It's not a problem. It's not a problem. But in Islamic culture, it's a problem. So when Islamites visited the continent and they documented their experiences, one of the things that some of them, all of them wrote is that how dare these African men allow their wives to have male friends visit them? That within Islamic culture, that is not acceptable. You cannot visit a woman in Islamic culture. As a man, you can't visit another woman in her husband's house. And yet, in West Africa, that was common. So I hope I have answered your question, sister.
To some degree, I was hoping that it didn't, even though I've enjoyed hearing you throughout these hours, I was hoping it wasn't that complex. I was hoping it was just simply that she's equal. And I know
Yes,
there are
yes,
different,
he's equal. Yes,
there's
sister.
different roles. Let me share this one because I want to get this to you. Is that are you familiar with Albert Churchward or Gerald Massey?
Yes, I'm familiar with. I'm not an expert on them, but I am familiar with some of their works. Yes.
Yeah, well, so some of their stuff they talk about early on, it's like the deities. I don't know if it was actually like deity, but that kind of statue that the woman was held in that regard because they honored her, realizing that she could bleed and not die, and that supposedly in their stories they, some of the men tried, but they upheld it, even though they still wound up doing some gruesome things. But the idea that it didn't start that way, and then somehow it got to the point where it was her role. And of course Christianity has that because it's built into it. She's the one that ate the apple, whatever, therefore she's the one to be. So it's built into, again, the religions build it in there. That's why I wonder why do we really need the religion? What the religion brings, it just seems to me, and more I listen to you all today, because again, I never thought about this before, but why do we need it? It brings a God. You have a God, I have a God, someone else has a God. The gods have different names, and our gods are they, in some of the movies, they battle each other. And so who are these external beings that we need to serve? And some of the ancients said, know thyself. Why do we have, and I do believe in the invisible realm, and I do believe that there's a lot of activity in the invisible realm. My question is, are we to always be subject to some invisible entity? And some of them require blood. If they get blood, then they'll bless you. If you kill a chicken or a cow or a person or whatever, why are we, in terms of spiritual systems, how did we get to the point that we can't have certain blessings unless we give blood? Because if there's a supreme being that made the blood, they don't need blood. And so who are these beings that are clearly not superior? They're not omnipotent, or they wouldn't need the blood that they created, because if they needed blood, they could make some blood. But anyway, I'm just wondering about the whole setup and of the system, because all in the Old Testament, that was part of it. I did some research, and all over the world, it's about every religion somewhere has a system where there's an invisible entity that requires sacrifices in order for it to give you favor. Yet so some of it simply doesn't make sense to me. But anyway, I just wanted to throw that in. But why do we need these other entities? I'm not saying we don't honor the ancestors. I do believe I have visions. I've seen, some things spiritually. But why do we need those that need blood? Why do we need those that, if you do this, then we'll do that? If you kill this person, you will do that. All these wars, and sometimes I think some of these wars are based on large blood offerings. So just share your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So if you ask me, you've answered the question yourself. Why do we need it? Clearly, you don't need it. That's what I'm hearing you saying. And there are others like you who don't need it. Right? So if you don't need it and there's no need for it, then don't do it. Yeah. The question becomes, if it is the belief of someone to shed blood, is there a point where it becomes acceptable to the rest of us? And the answer is absolutely.
But
Yeah,
if they're
absolutely.
doing, if they need blood, but they're needing, because sometimes it's people blood.
Yeah,
So I would say,
that's the point I'm making. That if you believe in shedding blood because your religion says so, at what point does it become acceptable to other people? And so, if you are shedding human blood, and the human blood you are shedding is not the blood of say your family, but you are shedding the blood of other people's families, then it's unacceptable. So, in as much as one can believe whatever they like, I think there is a point where if it's affecting you negative, you can say no. This is unacceptable. But going back to the earlier point you made in terms of woman, you asked me, oh brother, I thought you would just say they are equal. But you see, that's because you were watching out for a certain word in English. That is why you are saying that. But if the implication of my philosophical answer is exactly that, without using the word, if we all belong to the same matter, in the way I described it, yeah, that means we are all equal without even using the word equal. That is what it means. That there is no basis for putting in differences in terms of nature between the humanity of a man and a woman. I mean, absolutely that. So that means that philosophically, all men and women, if you put or all women and women, or women with men in brackets are equal. Why? Because they come from the same matter. So anything and everything to do with inequality, domination, segregation, etc., on the basis of sex, of religion, and so on and so forth, just focusing on sex, not sexual orientation, but sexuality, what we were born with, whether we were born male or female. If you focus on that, we are all equal. There's no question about that. There's no basis in philosophy, materialism that says that my mother who gave birth to me is inferior to me. That's complete nonsense. So I did answer your question, but maybe you're looking for a certain word. But that philosophically is what it means. That
and you did answer. You
Sorry?
did answer that. I see you did answer it, and so I appreciate it. So, but I appreciate this conversation today. I still really now come away saying, why do we need religion? If in fact, because of follow up on the other one, I'm sorry, my plane is flying over, not my plane, but the people who believe they need to give blood to invisible entities, is it perhaps because they feel powerless within themselves? Because if we feel, even according to the book of Genesis, that we are created image and likeness, and even in the Christian context, it says, Jesus said, ye are gods and all children of the Most High. If we believe that we are empowered or that we have some agency ourselves, then what is the outreach, the whole idea? Who taught us that if you want to really make some progress, you got to get some power from someplace other than yourself?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, that practice, that cultural practice, what it is a response to a particular material condition. And some practices die hard. They just persist, even though there is no need for them. There are two historical examples, if it's okay for me to refer to them. The first example is a British example. So we are told that when the British went to India, is it India or China, one of them anyway, that they had a rule in a particular community that says that women should be killed when their husbands die. So the British colonialists also said, well, we also have a law. Anyone who kills another person will also face the law. They will be imprisoned. So the story says that this woman's husband died, and the elders of the community went so that she will be killed. The British also arrived, waiting for the men to kill the women. They didn't stop it, but they waited and said, well, after the men have killed the women, then the British will arrest the men. And guess what happened? The men didn't kill the women. So clearly, it's a cultural practice that can change. But because the men had a higher colonial power over them,
one of the stories that I heard very similar is that they did not. No, one of the stories I heard from someone I think who was from, because I went to India one year, that in some cases the woman knew she had to fall on the fire, and then this particular woman did not, so her children threw her on because it was a disgrace if she was not in the fire. So the colonized mind there, I don't know, but they didn't get it. I don't know if they got it from the colonizer, but in there, because of the tradition called for it, then they still made sure she got in the fire.
Yeah, there is another example I wanted to refer to, but I have now forgotten it. So yeah.
My apologies. I'm going to get ready to log off, but I wanted to stay on as long as you all were sharing because I'm learning as I go. But I'll mute. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So if anybody else wants to come in, please feel free to come in. If not, the time is now 9 past 4 UK time. That is 1500 GMT plus 0. And yeah, so GMT plus 1 is 1400, and then GMT plus 2 is 1700. So it's 5 o'clock, I believe, in South Africa at this point. And where you are, Sisanyahu, I think it's in the afternoon or getting to the afternoon, if I'm right.
It's 10 o'clock, and I'm up working now. I've been up since 1. I'm on the computer. Yeah, it's 10 o'clock, 10 a.m.
Okay. So if there are no further contributions, I'm going to now close the meeting formally. Well, we have closed it formally already, but I'm going to then stop the recording and then close the meeting. Yeah. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to stop the recording now. Thank you.